Hello and welcome to the bonus materials for this week's review and recap from Westeros.org for episode 8, Second Sons. And this week I will once again be handling the highs and the lows, but first Elio will be handling some of the background material for this episode, and he's going to be focusing on, given the title of the episode, the free companies.
Okay, as Linda said, I'm going to talk about the free companies, and I'll start with that. I have something else I want to talk about afterward, but the free companies, these are the sellsword companies, the mercenary companies, largely found in Essos, but some of them end up coming over to Westeros to fight for the lords who'll pay for them. Some background: most of these sellsword companies, pretty much, or all of them is the impression, but I suspect most, have their origins in the Century of Blood. This is the roughly century-long period of outright sort of chaos and warfare between the former colonies and vassal cities of Valyria after the Doom, in which the Valyrian Empire pretty much disappeared in a single day. As a cataclysm, Valyria's center is sort of blown up, the Dragon Lords die in masses, and everything is chaos. So the sellsword companies form in that period of chaos and bloodshed, and in this, Martin is obviously inspired by the Middle Ages, where a lot of sort of the freebooter companies started showing up in Western Europe, for example, because of the 100 Years' War. Companies of men who basically hired themselves out to fight. You also had, particularly apt for this is also the condottieri of Italy. These are the companies that fought for various city-states over for their claims. Rather than hiring their own soldiers or keeping anything, their own armies, they often hired men to fight for them. One of the most significant one of these was the White Company, and actually there's an analog to the White Company in the novels. There's a company called the Golden Company, who are probably going to be mentioned at some point in the future, but they're made up of Westerosi exiles by and large, and they have knights in heavy plate, which none of the other free companies really have, and they are seen as the most feared, the most disciplined, the most dangerous company, and the largest as well in Essos. Now in the book, when Dany meets the sellswords outside of Yunkai, it's actually two separate companies that she meets. Miro of Braavos, the Titan's bastard, leads the Second Sons, and their name comes from the fact that they were founded by Second Sons, younger men who didn't have lands or property. And as it says, their reputation is dark. Miro has a bad reputation. The other company, which they sort of consolidated into just one company for a TV show, is the Stormcrows. And they're led by Prendol Nalgezin, that's the character Ramon Tikaram plays, and another character named Salor the Bold, who doesn't appear. And of course, Dario Naharis is part of them. So they've changed some of the details, but the consolidation makes sense there to just simplify things and have fewer characters. So the companies have this dark reputation. Often, a lot of people distrust them, but the free cities depend on them. They don't like exposing their own forces if they can avoid it. They're happier to spend money. They're wealthy cities. They have a lot of trade. They're happy to spend money to pay other men to fight their battles for them. In particular, there's a region called the Disputed Lands, which is this broad region between several of the free cities in sort of the southwest corner of Essos. They often fight over that territory. Jorah actually, was involved in fighting in the Disputed Lands, and I think even along the Rhoyne, over territories that they were fighting over all the time. So that is the sellsword companies in Essos and the role that they have there. But the other thing I want to discuss is we get some history about Westeros from Cersei, no less, which is explaining the story behind the reigns of Castamere. And for those who are book readers who are wondering, did George tell them this? Is this canon? No. In a word, no. The World of Ice and Fire will fully explain what happened. It's very different. But I can say right out that some of the details are even contradictory to what's said in the novels. For example, Cersei claims that the Rains rebelled against her father. Well, that's not really true. They rebelled against Lord Titus, her grandfather, Tywin's father, who was a very weak Lannister lord. And so Tywin dealt with them as his son and heir, but, and because his father was too weak-willed to do it himself. And that's where Tywin got his reputation, but it was against Titus that they rebelled. I think I can say that when she claims that she saw the bodies, Hanging over the gates of Casterly Rock, that's not correct. She wasn't actually born when this happened. This was very early on. Her father was quite young. It's an interesting thing about, I've always pointed this out to people, when Tywin dismisses Robb as a green boy as too young, he himself was a green boy when he won his reputation of defeating, fighting both on the Stepstones during the War of Ninepenny Kings, which we'll maybe discuss at some future date, but also dealing with the Rains and also another family called the Torbecks. Other details I can say that book readers will recognize as being kind of dodgy. The claim that Lord Rain built a castle as grand as Casterly Rock. I encourage you to go look at Ted Naismith's website. I think it's tednaismith.com, and look at his collection of his gallery, and look at his George R. R. Martin or Song of Ice and Fire section. He did the calendar for Song of Ice and Fire, the 2011 calendar, I believe. And he did a depiction of Casterly Rock, and you will see that in no way, shape, or form can Lord Rain have built a castle as grand as Casterly Rock. Casterly Rock is essentially like Gibraltar times 10. It is a huge rock, literally, in which over many thousands of years, tunnels, chambers, halls have been carved into it. It's massive. It's probably the largest interior space of any castle in Westeros. Bigger than Harrenhal, bigger than Winterfell, bigger than the Red Keep. So no, he did not build a castle that grand. Actually quite the contrary, but I won't say any more on that. Another detail is Cersei pretends that the Rains were the second wealthiest family in Westeros. Not actually true. They might have been the second wealthiest family in the Westerlands, possibly, maybe, but they were not anywhere near that level. In fact, funnily enough, the Lannisters are definitely the wealthiest, but the second wealthiest family seems to actually be the Hightowers of Old Town, which you haven't even heard about, I think, on the television show in any case. They are very old. They rule the second largest city in Westeros, and they have a huge sort of control over trade and a massive amount of wealth that they've collected over the centuries. So the Tyrells are very wealthy, but even the Hightowers, who are their vassals, more or less, are wealthier than them. The Reach as a whole is obviously the second richest region, but the Westerlands, of what's gold and silver mines, is the richest. So yeah, it's no fault of theirs that they don't really have the history right, because George didn't settle on some of his history until relatively recently, working on the World of Ice and Fire with us a bit and providing us some of the details from his notes and so on. But yeah, it's not correct. It could be correct for the show. It could be the show canon. Who cares, really? I don't really care about the show canon, but others do. But if you want to know what the books have, or the actual what Morton himself has written is rather different.
We didn't really feel that there were any strong highs or lows for this episode, to be absolutely honest. It's a pretty solid, inoffensive episode on the whole. It's not a great episode. There are some good parts about it, and there are some parts we don't like so much. So we'll deal with those, but it's not really very up and down, this one. We felt it was, it was solid. We'll start with the good part, perhaps. We really like, both of us, Liam Cunningham's performance as Davos. He really manages to inhabit that character, and in his scene with Stannis, and Stephen Delane is also doing a great job capturing the complexity of Stannis and his indecision when he's caught between these this dilemma that he's caught in, and his sort of turning to Davos and getting his advice at this point. And that's a really nice scene between them, and that's the sort of thing that it's a quiet scene. It's a talky scene, but it still drives things forward, and it says important things about the characters. So you don't need all action for an episode to have something really good in it. We also continue to like what they're doing, for the most part, with Dany this season, and her meeting with the mercenary companies came out quite well on the whole. Her handling of it was, that's a good scene. The introduction of Dario, well, we're a little divided on how well we feel he inhabits the character or not. Elio's a bit more positive towards it. I don't dislike it. I just feel that it's a little verging towards the sort of more standard badass again, that they're making the characters more standardized. He could have been They should have in particular kept the way he looks. Fine, maybe not the fork beard, but they could have gone with the blue hair at least, and they could certainly have gone with a more flamboyant clothing. He looks a bit like a reject from a Conan movie. He looks more sort of standard badass guy. That feeds into his body language being a bit sort of posturing and macho rather than flamboyant. I mean, these are quibbles, but I think again they're losing some of the shades of the characters, and they're not really managing to have the more interesting, the more unusual, that they simplify things. And speaking of simplifying, that'll get us to some of the low points of this episode. Tyrion. That is probably our big problem with this episode. The whole wedding thing and the continued whitewashing of Tyrion. He just can't seem to do anything wrong on the show. He's portrayed him going to Sansa and trying to be very, very apologetic for the situation and doing everything he can to make her feel good. It's going too far. He has his own problems. He has things that he gets caught up in. It doesn't mean he's a bad person, but he's not a saint, and they are making him a bit into Saint Tyrion. And then when we get to the wedding, because of this, because Tyrion has been doing so much to be so nice to Sansa, they cannot have Sansa refuse to kneel down. I mean, in the books, he goes up to her and he's sort of discreetly tugging on her skirt to get her to kneel down so he can put the cloak on her. And she thinks to herself, no, I don't care that he's going to have that humiliation. I mean, she's so hurt by this, all of this, and she's so vulnerable. She takes this little chance at a little rebellion, even though she's directing it at the wrong person. That doesn't mean she's a bad person, but she should have had that opportunity to have that very human moment. And they take that away because they want to have Tyrion be very nice, and then since he's, oh so handsome with that scar, according to Marjorie, it would be terrible for Sansa to be mean to him when he's asking her to kneel down. So they have to take that away. And it's diminishing both characters in terms of complexity. So I really don't think that was a good choice to make. And then finally, when we get to the whole bedding and Tyrion's the final line, I mean, it's a nice line for him to say, and and now my watch begins, but it's a lot less bitter than having him say, that's what the gods made whores for. And it really changes the dynamic of the character a lot. It takes away some of his resentment and bitterness and has it not being directed at all at Sansa and just sort of towards Joffrey, really. So I wish they would have dared to go there a bit more, and we are a bit concerned about what this means for some of the future developments of Tyrion, which we suspect that they'll be toning down a lot. And finally, and I'll try and be a little briefer on this so it doesn't get run on too long, we do have another scene that, yes, we thought that it was a bit unnecessary with the whole leech scene. Again, I wouldn't care if they recorded the whole darn show in the nude. I don't care about the nudity. That's not a problem as such. Nudity in itself is, it's not offensive or anything like that. But it gets in the way of they're accommodating what they do with the story to be able to show it off. In this case, we have Melisandre talking about not trying to frighten the lamb by showing it the knife, and then she goes and puts leeches on Gendry's cock. I mean, as a friend of mine pointed out, that's going to compromise that whole trust thing she was trying to build, isn't it? So, yes, I'm afraid I had to bring up the nudity again, and we really wish they wouldn't take that out just for the ratings and then having to compromise the story around it, and in this case having what she says in one scene not match up with what she actually does in the next scene.
And that is our bonus material for Second Sons, the 8th episode of the season. Solid episode, as Linda said. Not for us, not like a huge thing, but it was solid. It was pretty solid. And it's leading into a hiatus. Next weekend, they will be showing Behind the Candelabra, the Liberace biopic that Steven Soderbergh has directed. I'm actually kind of excited and interested in it. Matt Damon, Michael Douglas, that seems really interesting. But it's also Memorial Day weekend. So if you're wondering why we're doing it, well, when they aired Blackwater on the same weekend, it had like, I think it was like the lowest ratings of the series, or at least the second half of the season in any case. So they clearly want to have big ratings. And I think they're going to do a lot to try and hype up this episode, because episode 9 is titled The Reigns of Castamere, and it's a very important episode, and I definitely recommend you watch it when it airs on June 2nd. Until then, I don't know, maybe we'll manage to finally record something just about the novels, but we'll see you soon.